Chapter 7. Demonstrations. I was one of the few Indian leaders to support Britain during the war. So when the war ended and the government began to take many of our civil rights from us, I was very angry. I thought to myself, we must fight this. What right do they have to instruct us how to live in our terrible poverty? I decided to use non-violent resistance. We must fight against their anger, but we mustn't provoke it, I said. I began to travel again to educate the people. I started a new group called Satyagraha Sabha, and we organized a business strike. People prayed and fasted for a day to protest against the new British laws. Some of the demonstrators were violent, but the police were even worse. They were using a hammer to kill a fly. I spoke against the violence on both sides, but I soon understood. The Indian people weren't ready for non-violent resistance. The situation became even worse. At another public meeting in Amritsar, a terrible thing happened. Over 10,000 people came to a square to hear a speaker. They were listening peacefully, when suddenly an army officer called General Dyer entered the square with his soldiers. Without saying a word, he and his soldiers began to shoot at the crowd. The attack continued for 10 minutes. It was impossible to escape. In the end, 400 Indians were killed, and 1,200 were injured. It was a terrible massacre. At his trial, the prosecutor asked General Dyer, "Why did you do this?" General Dyer answered, "According to the law, they were not allowed to meet in a public place. But they didn't listen. It was my obligation to shoot them." Later, the court asked him, "Did you help the injured?" His answer was, "No." Why? They didn't ask for help. He and his men did a terrible thing, but General Dyer wasn't punished. I was horrified by this failure of British justice. I finally understood. British rule in India must end. We decided to boycott British councils, courts, and schools, and we decided to wear only Indian clothes. We burned our British clothes in enormous fires at public meetings. There is no beauty in the finest cloth if it makes hunger and unhappiness for the people, I said. Thousands of students, teachers, and professional men and women left the cities and went to the villages to teach the people there about non-violent resistance. Some moderate Indian politicians were worried about this policy, but the people supported me and respected my simple life. They called me Mahatma, the Great Spirit. The British did everything to try and stop us. The government began to arrest us because we didn't accept the authority of the army. In a short time, 30,000 of our people were arrested. This showed us they were becoming desperate. But soon the atmosphere became too hostile, and I changed my plans. I decided to concentrate on social problems and leave the political fight for a time. The government saw this as a sign of weakness and immediately arrested me. After a 100-minute trial, I was sent to prison for 6 years. People kissed my feet and cried when they heard the verdict. But I accepted the sentence because it was an important part of nonviolent resistance. Most of my time in prison, I read books, prayed, and made clothes. It also gave me time to think. While I was there, some of the members of the Congress Party started a new party and won some local elections. I was very worried about the division of our forces. I was also worried about the disagreements between the Hindus and the Muslims. After 2 years, I was freed. I began to travel around the country and did my best to unite the people, to help them get more economic freedom. I taught them to make their own clothes. I also worked hard to convince them to end some bad Indian customs, like child marriage and prejudice against the untouchables. They were called that because nobody was permitted to go near them or touch them.